agriculture can change people, their mind, their health, and ultimately the planet is just such a hopeful story. So I feel like this next session is going to be amazing. It's a bit like, you know, on New Year's Eve when you're watching the fireworks and you think it's over and you stand up to walk and then bang, the whole sky lights up again. So there's no pressure whatsoever, guys. I'd like to welcome to the stage Craig, Felice and Stacey. I'd like you to join with me in giving them a big welcome. I'm going to get out of the road because these people have lots to say. Our question today is, can we connect soil, human and planetary health? And of course, we've all learnt that they're all so interconnected. Each one of the panel is going to answer that question from their own perspective, and then we're going to open it up to the floor, and it's up to you people to decide where the conversation goes. So I'm going to hand over now, because he's closest to me, I'm going to hand over to Craig. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. Yes. No, so I think it comes to biodiversity. We've obviously heard a lot about that today, and if there's farming systems that can incorporate biodiversity and support biodiversity, what we see above ground, that'll be generally reflected in the below ground. And, you know, they say 59% of life on Earth is below ground. From the studies that people have done around the world, and some of that has been from our research group, they're showing that, you know, degraded, simple plant soil systems harbour potentially more microbes of potential pathogenic character, faster growing, generalist, opportunist sort of species that, you know, might be more potential pathogenic for plants, animals and humans versus something that's more mature, established, biodiverse. They're sort of slower growing, are more niche adapted, working together on complex foods. So just generally different types of microbes inhabit those different types of environments. The more biodiverse established systems will tend to suppress antimicrobial resistance, and the pathogens, as I mentioned. We're sort of seeing when kids are exposed to soil and plant materials, they have more fitness, better tolerance in their immune systems. Their immune systems are trained largely from contact from microbes. We're seeded with microbes. That is generally coming mostly from the environment. You know, we're a system, we're not a standalone organism. And a lot of these, the gut microbiome, etc., it's all seeded largely from the environment. And soils are a big part of that. And obviously, we're needing to get production. And so, farming systems, soils connect to human health. I'm not even talking about nutrition, and that's another huge, huge area. And at the end of the day, if we're not just worried about ourselves, we're interested in ecosystems, then we start to look after planetary health. So, it is all connected. Yes.
I think it's absolutely critical that we bring health into the conversation, because people are driven by self-interest, and that is just the way humans work. And so if you don't make it personal, if you don't make it about them or their family or something that's of close relevance to them and not distal but actually proximal, immediate, they tend to not pay much attention. If people can see very clearly, and developing the narrative is really important, that everything that happens out here is very closely connected to in here, and that if you have an environment and a planet that is degraded, that means that we are also degraded. And I would have said something about this probably yesterday, but the incidence of cancer in people under 50 has nearly doubled over the last 30 years. The rates of allergic and autoimmune diseases is going through the roof. Parkinson's disease, all of these conditions that we believe are linked back to our biodiversity are increasing. And that makes it everybody's, I guess, focus and interest, because so many people are affected by chronic diseases. Yes, we're living longer because of pharmaceuticals, but we are living far less healthy lives. So it makes it personal for so many people, and particularly in Western countries where you've had a couple of generations now where their food system is so deeply corrupted, they don't actually recognise that they're not eating food. They don't actually make the connection, because for them, food has become a commodity. It is something that you put in your mouth, and it's all about how it tastes, how inexpensive it is, how easy it is to get. You know, and as humans in a capitalist system, we have just been bred like farm animals to be consumers, made to feel that nothing is good enough. We're not good enough, our house isn't good enough, our car isn't good enough, our farms are not good enough, our produce isn't good enough. We must buy things to improve those things. I've been thinking a lot over the last couple of days about how we step out of that system, and I think I found Tammy's talk really, really powerful, because it's like, well, can we go back to relational rather than transactional? But what I've seen in the brief time I've been sort of in this space is that there's a lot of philanthropic funding and big funders who are in the climate and agriculture space. There's a lot in the health space, but they're not the same and they're not all integrated. I think you are not going to get leverage with the community, which is where the change has to come from, if you don't make it about people's health and something that affects them personally. And that's why I think bringing health into the equation is so important. And then obviously the fact that it's linked to the planet and the climate is just such a powerful narrative. So I'm going at the end of February to go hang with Craig for 2 days and his team, and bringing some of my team. And we're going to have a 2-day kind of workshop and thinking with some other researchers. And what we want to get out of it at the end is not a plan just to do research or to do a particular research project. It's much more than that. What actually I want to come out of it is a narrative. It is a story that, and a picture that we can draw, and a story that we can tell that everyone will respond to. And then we can look at that story, we can look at that picture, and we can see where all the gaps are. And then, of course, you know, the universe drops incredible people and opportunities into your lap, and you have Dan with all of those data. So the three of us will be working with Dan and the data, and we will be developing that narrative, developing that story, using our platforms to amplify this. And I always just trust in the process. You know, there's so much we don't know yet, and it's all very big and complex. But if you just take those small steps and know that you're not doing it on your own, and we're all in this together, then we will get somewhere. I still think it's a line ball as to whether, you know, humanity will survive or not. But we have to make that story. We have to bring everything together and create a narrative that every single human on the planet can respond to. I also think we need to somehow step outside of and subvert the current system. And that's something that, you know, when I was young and a really engaged, you know, activist and everything else before life and busyness and work got in the way, I would often think about these things, and now I'm going back full circle to thinking about them again. How can we share resources? How can we get away from the transactional and the capitalist and go back to the relational, the relationship with each other and with the soil and the planet and everything that we're now, luckily, through the tools of science, able to start to measure. And how lucky we are to have an opportunity to come together and to share knowledge. And so yes is a big, big yes. I can't wait to go play with Craig and the team in South Australia, to play with Dan, to go with Dan and talk to people who have lots and lots of money, because that's what, unfortunately, these things need, to develop that science. But I think we already have a great starting point. So, yeah.
Amazing. Can I come hang out too? No, I'm just kidding. I'll be the gate crasher. No, that sounds really, really exciting. I suppose, you know, the topic being One Health, for me, it's about interconnectedness. And basically also building bridges between disciplines. And so I think this is beautiful because there's so many different types of backgrounds really here. And I think so this is One Health, like this is reciprocity within sharing. And I think that's really important. I suppose one thing that I've been thinking about a lot, because I'm coming from a practitioner perspective. So not a research perspective, and not even necessarily a science perspective, but a human relationship one-on-one, helping people through their challenges day to day. And so two things. One is that I think we need to make these big topics like One Health or climate change less abstract and very specific for that person and what that person, can do. So really break it down and give the people actionable tools. So that's one thing that I think I try to do anyway, is actually try to make these big scary things actually more stories of hope. And what can we do rather than just feeling like, holy shit, we're all doomed. The other thing as well is that sometimes, to be honest, it feels like as a health practitioner, there's not a lot sometimes I can do for someone. And I know that sounds silly because, yes, we've got a relationship and they can eat beautiful food and I can help them so much. But when someone is battling with fertility and they're living in a world in which there are endocrine disrupting chemicals everywhere and I can't do anything about that for that person. I mean, in the last, I think it's 40 years, we've seen a 50% reduction in sperm counts. We're seeing rises in miscarriages. We're seeing rises in infertility in women and PCOS. There's a syndrome called phthalate syndrome, and it's one of the first syndromes during pregnancy that's been linked to a chemical. So phthalates are a compound found in a whole bunch of things, from pesticides to fragrances to plastics. And if a mother during pregnancy, particularly in the early stages of pregnancy, is exposed to phthalates at this very critical window, then it impacts the male genitalia for that little person's entire life. And that's really scary. And so one of the things that I used to, I suppose when I first started learning about all of this, is it can keep you up at night. Antibiotic resistance and cancer incidents, and it's horrible, really, and it's sort of frightening for our future generations. So there's two worldviews. I think one is that we are the problem. It's our problem. We've done this, and that's where I used to come from. Now how I reframe it is that I feel like we're the solution, right? We are the solution to solve the problems, and here are some solutions that this person can do that's within their capacity here and now to do. And that is going to be very different for each of us. So I think we've got to remember that, yes, we've been the problem, but we are also going to be the solution, and I think that's really empowering. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I feel like the same thing, like it's scary, but it's also exciting. It's wildly exciting to hear it when you guys join up. It's kind of like Marvel Comics, and like all the superpowers get together and enact change. So it's exciting coming to conferences like this are where it all starts, little people bouncing off each other and beautiful ideas being formed and growing. It's like a seed, and we've all been planted in this beautiful soil. So many thanks to Matthew and Sadie and the whole team who put this together. Now we're going to throw it to the floor. If anyone has some questions they'd ask to or ideas or money. There's a bucket being handed around as you speak. Questions? Come on, don't be shy. Yes.
I just wondered if the panel to share their thoughts on if we get this stuff right and dream big with that possibility that we are the solution, right? The body's the biological intrinsic nature of healing and repair. I just wondered whether you'd come across research on that, or just some of your thoughts that, we get that first principle right of do no harm. Could you share some awe and wonder or some magic of biology that we have this ability to heal ourselves, therefore we can also heal a planet? But I think it starts with self first, and reflect a bit on that, the ability for biology to self.
Do you have a specific person you'd like to answer that?
I've worked a lot with Stacey, so I know
Stacey?
cool answers.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear the other two.
Well, let's start with Stacey. And the question was the world is, or the human body is incredible.
Ability to heal.
and its ability to heal is intrinsically natural to the human body. What are some of the wonder stories that you can give us examples of that? Yeah? Pump it up. Pump it up, Stacey.
Where do I start? I think we all have the capacity to regenerate, right? Like, we are regenerative organisms just like everybody else or everything else. But it depends on the context of the environment, and also I think that person's willingness as well. But one of the things that astounds me is the speed in which that can happen. So I think I've always known that we've had that ability, but I suppose I thought it might take a really long time for some people if they have, for example, eaten an atrocious diet for the first 40 years of their life. How could we possibly reverse some stuff in 6 months? And yet it happens. And so I think that's what I'm really excited about, is the speed in which these things can happen. And I think too, it's not just chemistry, it's not just biology, like it's not just physics, it's all of it working in synergy with each other, and with someone's will, and belief as well, that, that can happen. Yeah.
For me, I think it comes down to the microbes that we've only really just started to understand, because they are incredible healers. There's emerging evidence that the microbes that live on and in us, particularly those in our guts, are actually really powerful detoxification organs. So the all of the microplastics and the PFAS and endocrine disruptors and all of the absolutely awful chemicals that humans have made from products of industry that are through every single corner of the world, it looks like it's those microbes that can actually deal with them. It looks like the human microbes are actually able to help to get rid of them out of our system. It looks like there may be ways that microbes can deal and break down awful plastics and pollutants and things in the environment and the soil and the water. The power of microbes is incredible, and it really does come back to that idea of the earth being super, super powerful at looking after itself. Now, whether we get chucked off in the process, and still, as I said, I think it's a line ball, I don't have any doubt at all that the planet and its systems can regenerate and heal. But if we can help our own microbes to do that, then, maybe we'll survive as well.
Okay, so you wanted a bit of wonder and awe. I'm not quite going to go to Dan territory, but, I sleep at night. I don't think about it, but I keep breathing, There's stuff happening that I don't need to think about. The Earth, the Gaia hypothesis gets a bit poo-pooed by modern biology, but at the same point, we've got a chemical composition of the atmosphere that's way out of whack compared to what it should be if it was just something that was left to its own devices. And so there's some thing happening there that keeps life going, this idea of homeostasis. Even take the smallest little living organism, it's got a sense of benefit and drawback. It's got, it makes decisions. Every little bacteria, every fungi, things with our eyes or brains, they can say what's good, what's bad, and they're making decisions and guiding towards something that keeps them alive. So I guess it's up to us to decide what we think is good and bad and what's going to keep us alive.
I think too, Jake, there used to be, I suppose, more of a perception of the body like the gut was just an organ of plumbing. And now we're like, whoa, it's so much more than that. Or the appendix was useless. And now we're like, whoa, it's the microbial wingman. So a lot of these, I suppose, parts of the body and the body itself that we have really dumbed down, and we've really assumed that they're sort of non-essential. Now with research, it's like, wow, these are so important for us. And when you learn about why we have these things in place and what they can do for us, it's absolutely magical. And you can't not be excited about the potential for human health, when you learn more about these things. Yeah.
And I think, you know, the processes and the tools of science are so useful. The reason that we focus on doing very, very high standard, rigorous scientific research is that because that is what our empirical Western system needs to make changes. But I'm with Dan in that we are just incredible beings that are part of a conscious universe. And we have to maintain our humility and recognise that what we can see, feel, touch, measure, smell is just the tiniest little proportion. And just trust about our instincts and act with integrity. And if you do that, any decision you make, you think about why you're doing it and is it being done in accordance with what you intrinsically feel is the right thing, and that, you know, whatever wants you to do, or, you know, tapping into that life force, then you can't go wrong. You know, one way or another it'll be lumpy and bumpy and messy and chaotic, because that's humans and that's the world and that's the universe. But we'll get there, and if our particular form of species doesn't quite make it, something will come next. Like somehow this is just a little tiny blip in the process of time. And enjoy the ride and the adventure, but just try and act according to your best instincts, and that's the best you can do.
That definitely puts it all into perspective, like we are just a tiny little blip. And the do no harm, I think we could do with a sticker on everyone's bumper, do no harm. Next question, please. Up the back with the white shirt.
Each of you were president of the world for a day or a week or a month or whatever it took. What would your silver bullet be, and what would success look like? How would you define success?
Okay, so the question was, if you were the president of the world, what would be your one silver bullet that you would each use? I'm going to spin it to Felice.
Oh,
First.
God.
Everyone's got to answer
Oh,
this one.
look. It would probably be around getting rid of governments and those sorts of structures, because, you know, we really are bad at this stuff. Like, just at every single level, you think, oh, local council, that's local community doing things. Oh my goodness, I don't know of a single council that functions well and that's not driven by vested interests and, you know, distrust and everything else. State government, federal governments, global governments. People are just so prone to being corrupted by power, by money. And, you know, the people who are happiest acting on their worst instincts or in the least ethical ways are generally the ones that get into positions of power and money. So I don't know what you do about that, because I'm not sure that enforced communism or anything is a good idea either. But I don't actually know what I would do first or where I would even start. You know, if you think about the global food industry and big agriculture and all of those things that make up the global food system, it's probably the biggest system in the world, probably more than the armaments and everything else. If you disbanded all that, you just suddenly got no economy for so many people, no jobs, no everything else. Maybe if you just outlawed capital and got everyone to go back to bartering. I don't know. No idea. Geez, if we had that answer, we'd all be in a much better position.
It's up to you, Stacey.
Yeah.
I don't know if this answers your question at all, but I think connection is at the heart of health. And I think that we're in a loneliness epidemic. And so if I had a magic wand, I think it would just be for all loneliness to be gone and for everyone to reconnect and connect. So that would be one thing. And the other thing that's far more practical but totally unrealistic is to factor in all the externalities into ultra-processed foods, because then they're not so cheap anymore. And I think that would change the game as well. Yeah.
So fascism is not anyway. No. So part of our problem, I think, is that we like to put things in boxes. You know, health, education, defence, production, environmental conservation, and going way back, things were kind of a bit of a blurry. Yeah, so I don't know. There's kind of social aspects to it. There's environmental, probably employment, but I don't know. I guess make a UBI, is it, universal basic income? Decent safety net, which we kind of have in Australia compared to other parts of the world. So cover people's health, just basic income, so you don't have those real extremes of poverty. And this could be kind of semi-dreadful, but and traumatic, but give people give people, either you need a time machine for people to go forward and say, here's where we're going, this is what it looks like in the future. Was that really a good idea? And we can't do that, but for people to have situations crop up in their lives where they come to realise what's most important, and sometimes that's through a bit of trauma, losing close ones. Just giving people being sick themselves, giving people the chance to realise what's most important. And also national service in a Green Army. Green Army. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Great for Prime Minister. Yeah. You're in, buddy. You've got our vote. Okay, who has another question, please? Yes.
Thinking about, are there any countries or regions or communities that are doing this very well that we can maybe learn from anywhere on the planet?
What flagship countries are setting an example for the rest? Are there some really good examples that we can follow or use as a blueprint?
I stay in a bit of a bubble with my research, but there's probably a couple of points I can just get to with that. I mean, and on happiness indices, there's places like, is it Nepal? I'll probably get that wrong. Bhutan, sorry, yep. So if it's a happiness index, maybe it's something like that. I attended a conference many years ago, and it was kind of about the planetary boundaries that we saw a slide on today, and they showed a graph of like GDP, and I think it might have been happiness or whatever, and there was kind of this trend of all these countries going this way, and there was like a little blip out here on the side, and it was like, which country is low in GDP but high in happiness? And it was like 1,000 people in the audience, and they go, oh, what's this country here? And I had my hand up because I'd seen like this permaculture video where Cuba had gone through like a peak oil sort of crisis when the Soviet Union collapsed, and they kind of came together and applied permaculture principles and got themselves out of a heap of shit that they were in. And I said, yeah, that's Cuba. And it was Cuba. The guy didn't, come to me. But anyway, I'm not saying, let's turn into Cuba, because that's probably bad. But just getting the mix between, community, happiness. And this is kind of something that I really noticed coming to this event, was just the sense of community. I was kind of blown away. So something about community without, communism's got labels, obviously, but community is.
Yeah. And Cuba has a health budget that's only 5% of that of the US, but its health outcomes and metrics are the same, because that 5% they put into prevention and public health. I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time and work in Norway, and Norway's probably, out of all of the incredibly imperfect things in places that humans do and structures, probably is the best, where they really invest in public health. There's a shared understanding that what's good for one person is good for everyone, that if you invest in humans and human capital and valuing, there's not a huge difference in salary between, say, a doctor and a childcare worker, and people who do really important work. And what I remember being really struck by this, because obviously they've got huge natural resources and through their North Sea oil, but most of the wealth from that goes back into the country, and everyone has a shared understanding that that's a good thing. But one of the really big things they do is that every single family has access to extremely good quality public childcare from the time a child is 1. Now, the economic value of that, by getting parents back into the workforce, is actually equivalent to or more than the whole of the income they derive from the North Sea oil, because what they also have is the Norwegian Institute for Public Health that was set up by the government to do research to answer questions that the government wanted answers to. And when they do that research, they get the answer, they feed it back to the government, and hey, the government makes policy based on it. So in Australia, we have this multi, gosh knows how much money, National Health and Medical Research Council, Medical Research Future Fund, doing research. Do governments in Australia ever go to the experts and ask them, what does the evidence say? What does the research say? What should we do here if we're designing this policy and that policy? Not a chance. So they fund programs that have no evidence base or even evidence that they don't work, because they think that that will get them kudos with the general public, and they don't invest in the things that do have an evidence base. And I remember asking Kim Carr about this many years ago when he was the federal minister, science minister, and I said, why is this? And he goes, because politicians don't want people to know if something doesn't work. And, you know, this is just insanity, but it's gotten a whole lot worse, no better. So Norway is possibly the best option in a bunch of very poor options that I know of.
Yeah. My perspective is, I suppose, we don't have to look too far to find micro examples of this working. I don't think any of us have to look too far within our own communities to see where this beautiful reciprocity within a community is happening and it's working. So, yeah, I think we just look around us and draw inspiration, you know, from that. Yeah. Signet, there you go.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a lot to be found in small communities, getting to know your neighbour, sharing your produce with your neighbour, talking to your neighbour, getting to know their name. Yeah, I mean, there's something really beautiful about that community, and that's where it starts. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to hear how the panel responds to some existing theories or ideas or practices that do incorporate a sense of individual health, community health, and global health, such as, I'm thinking, naturopathy or biodynamics, something like that. And do you think that there's a cultural element that is an important part of this discussion that we're having as well? And how do we incorporate that into building a narrative around health?
Yeah, that's a really big question. How do we build in the things that we know and learn into what environment, and what cultural expectations or constraints there are around that?
Having come from a background like a family with naturopathy and that sort of paradigm, I think there were some good things about that. There were some really hugely problematic things about that. And when I say that I'm surprised I survived my childhood, like, I'm actually not even being that facetious. I think whatever traditional wisdom, traditional knowledge is so critically important to consider and to look at, or maybe test with using scientific tools to go, okay, so that's got validity. Actually, yeah, that works. Oh, that doesn't work. So we don't take that on, and integrating it into our whatever it is, the processes, practices, stories, having gone through that filter. One of the big issues, of course, is ignoring the traditional owners, original First Nations people, and all of their collective wisdom, which again has always been around self-interest and money and capital. And I think we're getting a little bit better at considering that in some areas. So there's a lot that we can glean from back in the day, and, you know, things that used to be considered useful and that are really worth looking at. But I would always say that we need to bring the tools of science to evaluate what works and what doesn't, and what is just an old wives' tale and what is actually valid.
Yeah. For me, I think I just think it's really important to always have what Robin Wall Kimmerer calls two ways of seeing. And so that basically is what Felice is talking about, really, with combining our culture and collective cultures, to that. And I think what I've learnt just from it, purely from a nutritional perspective, is that, there's, like Fred Provenza, for example, talks about 3 pillars of nutritional wisdom. So they are flavour feedback relationships, so this flavour feedback relationships within the body. They are intergenerational knowledge and culture. And I've just gone blank on the third one. It'll come to me. I can't believe I've gone blank on the third one. Anyway, someone can go, no. Yeah, I've got time. But I'm convinced that the food culture piece is the most important part of it, because our intergenerational knowledge shapes so much around our perception of food. And as I mentioned in my talk the other day, our perception of food alters how we respond to that food and how we consume that food. And it's so very important. And so I think we just have to be valuing all ways of knowing so equally, I think. Yeah, that's my perspective, yeah.
Sorry, I must have had quite a different upbringing, because I think I was very conventional. Our family, I kind of didn't really know what nature was until I was quite a bit older. And I think if you spend too much time just watching mainstream TV, you get conditioned into maybe not thinking for yourself too much, and maybe not having, primary observation skills, where you kind of see things for yourself out and about and everywhere, and question, be open to questioning things and be open to new or different sort of ways of thinking. And yeah, I kind of went through a bit of a period, probably in my 20s. I was getting a lot of illness, and I went to see a naturopath. It was actually like a bunch of third-year student naturopaths, and they fixed me up. And they fixed up a lot of problems I was having with my health. And I guess I would have never known about that way of doing things unless my wife sort of put me onto that through, and it was a friend of hers who was studying naturopathy. So I think a lot of people don't get exposed to, so-called alternative ways of thinking, or I guess it's apologies for the labels and whatever, sort of allied health, or what's the sort of name for, I guess, you've got medicine and sort of doctors, and they'll classify diseases, and that's kind of one way of thinking. And then there's more holistic sort of approaches. And I think a lot of people don't really get exposed to that because they are conditioned through mainstream media, reading the newspapers. And it's really unfortunate, I think. And maybe this is a problem with the media that we have today.
The other side of the coin is the rise of the influencer, because what we find in our field, working in health research, is that we have to spend so much time and effort combating just shocking misinformation. And that's generally promulgated by people. Sometimes it's like they actually really do believe this, and they've, not being trained in the scientific method. They might read a single study or a couple of studies that backs up their particular belief system and not understand the major issues with the scientific publishing model now, and the fact you can get almost anything published if you pay the money to get it published. So but there's a real culture in capitalism, and particularly we see it in the Americans, of promoting stuff that just does not have an evidence base, because they want to sell their book, their supplement, their training program, whatever it is. And we see the Joe Rogans of this world are just promoting just the most horrendous amount of misinformation. And I guess one of the things I would do, actually, if I was president of the world, I would get kids trained from the first day of school in the scientific method, but also in understanding society. I think it used to be called civics, where you would understand about how does government work? How does structures work? How do humans come together to make decisions? How does money work? What role does it play in our society? When you see things being advertised to you, when you look at social media and the algorithm, who is making money out of this? Why? Just to that critical thinking and that questioning all the time. And the scientific method is just simply a tool for understanding what we can, safely say, look, there's some evidence to support this, and that just which doesn't have the evidence. There's a really great book that I read when I first started my PhD called Bad Science by someone called Ben Goldacre. And I now get any potential PhD students who want to come and start with me to read Bad Science, because I tend to attract some people who have some really non-evidence-based viewpoints. And I go, look, very happy to consider your CV or whatever, but you need to read this first, because you need to start thinking a bit more critically. Because I didn't have that, when I came into science. I was full of all sorts of dogma that was not evidence-informed. And so I learned, through becoming a better scientist. But that book was given to me by my supervisor, and it was really transformational. But I just think every year 8 kid should be reading that book, so that they can discriminate between, wheat and chaff out there in the world, and always asking that question, who is making money out of this?
I just wanted to clarify something I said. Doctors are great, they fix you up when needed, but yeah, probably the main point was that just everyone should be encouraged to think more holistically. That's probably...
I love that naturopathy helped, though.
Yeah. It does. It can be
Yeah,
amazing.
of course. Yeah. So I thought of the third pillar, which is access to the range or whole foods. So literally access to good quality food. So when you think about those three pillars, flavour feedback relationships, which is essentially the health of the body, intergenerational knowledge in food culture, and access to whole foods. Somebody could have a healthy body, they could have access to those beautiful foods, but if they don't know how to cook or prepare those foods, they're in trouble. And so, again, I think it comes back to those old ways of knowing, and they're just so very important. The other thing I thought of, if I had a magic wand, we're going to have heaps of things here, is I would love truly for anyone who's studying health, whether that be naturopathy, nutrition, dietetics, integrative GP, whatever it might be, or GP, to learn about soil in some capacity. I'm not talking about full-on agronomy. I'm just talking about, let's just connect a dot here, and now let's go forward. But I think there's nothing, and even in a holistic nutrition course, there is still nothing, which in 2024 is sort of mind-blowing. Yeah. So that would be another magic wand.
That was probably the greatest aha moment for me when I connected the dots, but it was also kind of unbelievable, because you were kind of like, well, doesn't everyone know that? Like, doesn't everyone understand that? And they don't. And that is, fascinating and frightening at the same time. So we're going to bring back social science in year 8 and home economics, and maybe a bit of gardening as well. Yeah. Horticulture. Yeah. And the army. Yes. Ash Green Army, sorry. Green Army, yes. Yes.
I wanted to ask, how do we trust the science? Because science has also been corrupted.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting question, especially now, and on the back of what Felice said, that people can literally pull whatever they want to make it suit their agenda. An agenda is quite often the background to science studies. Would I be right in saying that? That there might be financing involved, or... So can we trust science?
Sometimes, yeah. I think you can trust the scientific method. That's very different to being able to necessarily trust the science, because what you have with science is definitely vested interests behind the scenes in many aspects of it that are, like in the case of, like in dietetics and nutrition, you would know this, that so much of the curricula in those courses is informed by industry, big food. And we see it in many, many different areas, that the courses and the content are actually in agriculture. I would imagine that Big Ag is just absolutely behind everything, and this is why people, have that particular system. I think it's almost impossible, actually, for people to discern between good and bad science anymore, because what we have now, and it would take me forever to explain it to you, but it used to be that with science, there was a really great, all free, mind you, because scientists do a hell of a lot of work for free, but a peer review process where somebody did a scientific study and they'd send it out to all their peers, and their peers would look at it and pick holes in it and go, well, you haven't looked at this properly, or you've made a mistake there, or something like that. And by the time it got to being published in a journal, which people didn't have to pay to publish in, then that science would generally be pretty good. Now we have these open access journals, and there are thousands of them, tens, like every year, thousands more and more and more. And people have tested it. You can publish anything in these papers as long as you can cough up the $5,000 or $6,000 to do it. So trusting the science, it's very difficult. I think that you have to find a scientist or researcher that you do think that you trust, and then, okay, let's fact check things against them. Sometimes they'll know, sometimes they won't, but a good scientist will say, I don't know. A good scientist will also say, well, I've changed my mind about that because the evidence is now updated and it actually contradicts what I thought before. And a good scientist doesn't have things to sell, but it is very difficult. I think that, I used to be the most trusting person in the world, and it's really sad now because I really find it's like, question everything, don't trust much at all. Who's behind this? Because the more you know about the world, the more you just go, oh, for goodness sake. Yeah.
It's becoming a bit of a scary world because, like AI, AI are now, is it plural, singular? They're now writing papers and reviewing papers, AI. And science is kind of a big blobby term. You've got, what's the motivation? What's the framing of science? What's the activity of science involving the scientific method? And then you've got the sort of knowledge base that gets built up. And kind of science is a work in progress, in theory anyway. So can you trust the science? Well, it's a work in progress. And you've got to look at what's the motivation for this work. Are they doing it correctly? And like social license, I think, should come into it as well. Like, science is in theory, evidence-based is kind of, in theory, right across Western society, in theory. We'd like to think so. Social license, so like mining companies need social license to do stuff. And we sort of had a bit of a talk about the biotech industry and sort of lab-grown meats there. But other examples of biotech, they're, to manage heart disease, they're editing the human genome to try and manage heart disease. And that's science, and there's probably other ways to manage heart disease, but editing the human genome, I'd sort of ask, social license needs to come in there at some point and say, hey, is that a good idea? Should we really be doing that? I'm not sure. So yeah.
They don't have the social license, but they'll do it anyway.
Yeah. So science can be scary. It can be good.
How did that go? Did that answer your question? I think we can trust these guys, right? Yeah. Okay.
When we don't know something or when it's unclear.
Yeah. Listen, I don't know about you, but I just looked at my clock and it's 8 minutes to 5, which means we are out of time. I do not want to get in Matthew's bad books for being late to class. I'm just going to hand back to these three people, and I'm going to ask you in 30 seconds for a quick nugget to sum up. 30 seconds. Your time starts now.
Yes, I thought we needed to finish on something positive. So yeah, biodiversity through soils to human health, and we can fix our problems.
And I have faith in the younger generation. I see my daughters and their peers, and I've got Ivan and Christy over in the corner there and all their peers. I have faith that maybe, just maybe, we'll survive.
And I 100% echo both of those. But also I think remembering that, you know, we see sometimes this linear relationship, like soil, plant, plant, animal, animal, human, but it goes both ways, right? So I think the human impact on the animals in terms of management and then the plants in terms of the soil, I think that is really empowering, that it works both ways. And we have so many people who are so good, you know, at giving back, and that's awesome. Yeah.